Hey, you've really seemed to have caught me at a bad time. But don't worry, now that you're here, I guess I have the opportunity to show you around the place. Alright, so starting off, I have probably one of the most beloved things you'll ever see. The chair. This is pretty much where all the magic happens. This chair right here is where every simple idea I've ever come up with has been. And this chair is a magical place where I get to share my events, share my stories, and just share anything interesting I have. This chair right here, this chair I'm sitting right on, this is a pretty good chair. Alright, so the next thing I wanted to show you is something that I'm really proud of owning. Something that I've been trying to look for a really long time, and that when I finally found it, it was something I just had to have. And I'm really happy to finally be sharing it with you. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to the wall.
Hey guys, who the hell is AZ talking to? In fact, more importantly, what the hell is he doing?
He seems delusional. Something bad must have really happened to him.
Oh, I think I know what's going on.
Yeah, I know I've already talked about this guy, but this is such a lovely cow.
AZ Negative, have you been in contact with water recently?
No. What would make you think that happened?
Because you always become crazy every time you're anywhere near water.
No, I don't.
Yes, you do. I bet you wouldn't even do a video on video game levels because then you would have to mention water because of underwater levels.
Fine then that's exactly what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna do a video on video game levels and I'm gonna mention underwater levels along with that. What have I just done? Video games are great. I think everyone and their mom can agree with me on that. But when it comes to what makes these games great, that's a different story entirely. See, when you get down to it, there are many aspects to a game that makes it great. From level design, assets, music, and story. But what I'm talking about today is levels. Yes, levels, stages, zones, whatever you want to call them. These are arguably the most important things when you talk about games. Because fundamentally, without levels, there wouldn't be any real way to progress in games. And yeah, I know not every single game has levels involved. But even open world games like Breath of the Wild or GTA still require some level of progression to access certain areas or story missions. With the exception of games like, Pong, every game has some sort of version of a level. Pong, on the other hand, that's about it. But if you've ever played a game, you would know that not every level in a game is the same. But in order for game developers to actually indicate a change in levels, they introduced new level themes, which introduced us to our new concept being, level themes. And level themes are just so cool. I mean, the idea of changing a level through the environment, enemy design, and obstacles, all based around one idea, is a neat concept. Now, there are so many level themes out there that it's going to be too difficult just to talk about most of them. So instead, I'm going to give you the rundown on some of the more basic ones. Starting off with the first level theme most people would be introduced to being green. Yep, I said that right. Or grassland or plain. Now, the reason it's referred to as green or grassland is probably because most platforming games, especially those from the 90s, had every introductory level having some sort of green involved. And I honestly have no idea why they decided to use green as the main color for the introductory level. Maybe it's because green represents good and therefore shows that you start off in a good place and then I guess get closer to the enemy, which wouldn't be green. Or maybe it's because grassland is so uninteresting to look at generally that they decided to use it as the base for the first level so that every other level at least looks visually more interesting. But whatever the case is, it works. As an introductory theme, it's nice and simple and it works. And because the introductory level theme is so simple and plain, it allows for other levels not to only look better visually, but also to implement gimmicks to make them stand out a bit more. For example, ice levels usually implement, ice, meaning the terrain is slipperier than normal levels, therefore making platforming a bit more challenging. And I guess to counter this, these levels usually have the best looking scenery in the background, as well as some of the best music in the entire game. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'd probably give these levels an 11. Because that's how ice I am. Underground levels, on the other hand, usually focus on more enclosed levels. They usually have a more darker appearance compared to grassland levels, and because they're so enclosed, they offer more fun things like puzzles and more maze-like level design. And don't even get me started on desert levels. I mean, 1 minute you could be outside in the sand dune trying to jump over giant tornadoes and sandstorms. The next you could be inside a pyramid trying to jump over different booby traps. And maybe you could face a final boss which could be like a giant mummy or sphinx or there's just so many possibilities. All in all, I think you all get what I'm trying to say. Level themes can offer a great variety when it comes to a game, keeping it fun and fresh the whole way through. But what exactly makes a great level theme? Well, there's a few factors involved. For instance, a level theme has to stay consistent to the overall gameplay that the game has already established previously. For example, an ice level still has to keep within the same gameplay style as the introductory grassland level. Even though they have gimmicks like slipperiness, as long as it's still keeping within that gameplay style, then it shouldn't be a problem. It also has to be fun. Like, if you're adding a gimmick for the sake of adding it there without it adding any extra value, then what's the point of it being there in the first place? Other than that, these are the factors to when it comes to making a good video game level.
Hey, you didn't mention water levels once. What gives? Why do you hate water and why didn't you mention underwater levels?
It's because RPGs suck. Because FPS suck. Because underwater levels suck. Well, I was bound to talk about this eventually. Now, let me just get this straight. Nothing in life is perfect. There's always an aspect of something that can ruin an experience, and that thing for video games is easily underwater levels. Now, underwater levels have existed for quite some time. The first instance I can think of it being in a game would be Super Mario Bros., but I'm pretty sure it's been around way before that, and definitely after. Now, the idea of underwater levels in theory is pretty interesting. Execution, on the other hand, not so much. You see, the idea of implementing swimming levels alongside regular gameplay levels, like platforming for example, was an innovative concept, but as I mentioned before, the execution wasn't that great. Now, many people over the years have tackled the topic of why underwater levels suck, and have offered many answers to this question, and today I'm here to offer even more answers to this question. Today, I'll be splitting up this video into 3 different segments: changing gameplay, level design, and aesthetic. So, we might as well start off with the first topic I've just mentioned. Now imagine this. Say you're a young child from the early 80s and you're experiencing Super Mario Bros. For the very first time. You've realized by pressing the A button that you can jump, and that if you jump on top of an enemy, it kills them. You've realized how to run by holding down the sprint button. You've realized that the second level of the world is an underground level, and that the 4th level is what features the final boss. You're on World 2-1, and it's a regular stage, but as you get into World 2-2, thinking it would be an underground level, bam! Water. Now, the introduction of an underwater level in Super Mario Bros. was... well, it was something. Now, everyone knows at this point that Super Mario Bros. Is a platformer. The main thing about this game is that you jump on things, but as soon as you hit underwater, well, there's not really much to jump on. Controlling your character underwater works about the same when you're on land, with the exception that you can move upwards and downwards. However, the jump button is now used to paddle upwards. Yeah, without pressing this button, your character just sinks downwards towards the ground, where there's not really much to do besides walking really slowly. Now we can already see the problems with underwater gameplay. You see, when you're on land, the gameplay is fast and frenetic, but underwater, it's just constant tapping the action button and moving forwards, but also trying to avoid obstacles up and down. Also, the way you attack enemies underwater is completely different from when you are on land. Everyone knows how you kill a Mario enemy. You jump on their heads. Underwater, it doesn't work the same. Now, obviously, you can't jump underwater, but you would think just swimming up and bonking an enemy's head would do the trick. Well, it doesn't. Instead, it just kills you. Literally, the only way to defeat an enemy underwater in a Mario game is if you have a fire flower on you. If you don't have one, all you have to do is now avoiding the enemy, making the gameplay just pointless. The gameplay becomes less of overcoming obstacles and more just trying to avoid them at all costs. And spoiler alerts, this really isn't fun. On top of that, there are barely any underwater levels in the original Mario Bros. Game, and it makes me think, why bother adding this in the first place? And I know it was to create a new gameplay feel and change up things, but it becomes an annoyance. But that's enough about Mario. Let's look at another franchise that has underwater levels involved into it. Sonic the Hedgehog, practically infamous for the underwater levels it has. Sonic 1 in particular has probably some of the worst underwater levels in video game history. Labyrinth Zone is a good example of how not to design a Sonic level. Nay, just how not to design a video game level in general. Sonic is all about speed. His whole purpose is just to run fast, gain momentum, and zoom past the stage, and every level up to this point has generally kept with this theme. Labyrinth Zone, on the other hand, flips this whole concept around. For starters, most of this level takes place underwater, and Sonic moves so slowly. Secondly, the level is designed to be one gigantic maze, meaning the only way to get to the end is if you find the right exit, meaning you'll be spending time and time again just trying to find the right place, and that's just trial and error. And the third and worst reason possible, Sonic can't breathe underwater. So get this, in a level where the entire thing is filled with water, where it's designed to be a confusing maze, making it hard to traverse, your character can only stay underwater for a short period of time before they start to drown. Labyrinth Zone is just the worst. The worst. Now, thankfully, future Sonic games reduce the amount of acts which contain water levels, but they still decided not to fix any of the problems featured in those levels. You still move slowly underwater and you still can't breathe. And I don't get this. For a world as fictionalized as the Sonic one, why did they decide to make water the point of realism? And all these points I've stated for these two games pretty much applies to every underwater level in any 2D game during the 80s and 90s. All of them had super slow gameplay, they had to constantly be tapping the A button, it was all about avoiding obstacles, you couldn't really kill enemies unless you had some sort of projectile attack, and most importantly, you were slow. But how could things possibly get worse? Well, 3D happened. Now, the transition from 2D to 3D was a revolutionary point in the video game industry. Characters being built out of 3D polygons instead of sprites, analog button controls, and of course, the most important one, being able to control your character in a 3D environment. Now, it's pretty obvious that 3D games were way harder to develop for than 2D games, mainly due to the fact that, well, it's in 3D. Designing for 3D is far more complex than it is to design for 2D, but some game developers managed to do it, and one company that was able to successfully transition their character from 2D to 3D was Nintendo. Super Mario 64 was a revolutionary title in the world of gaming, showing everyone just how fun it was to control Mario in a 3D environment, and the level of control was incredible. For being Nintendo's very first fully 3D title, Mario 64 controls quite well. Now obviously it's not as good as modern gaming titles, but even back then, it's still pretty fun to control. But of course, with everything great in life, there must always be a struggle, and that was 3-dimensional swimming. Now, just to be clear, the way in which 3D controls work underwater in Super Mario 64 basically apply to any 3D game with swimming, even to this day. And I'm just gonna say it, but yeah, controlling a character underwater kinda sucks. For some reason, every underwater level going forward decided to take the Sonic the Hedgehog route when it came to underwater level design. That means slow movement, terrible controls, and yes, of course, you can't breathe underwater. Even Mario, of all characters, the franchise that practically defined underwater levels for a whole new generation, did the same system that Sonic did, and they did it worse. Controlling your character in 2D was bad enough underwater, but with 3D and with 360-degree movement, it's just unbearable. Yeah, controlling a character underwater in 3D was really bad. In fact, I believe the reason why people bring up why water levels suck is probably because of 3D gaming. And yeah, I know more modern titles have fine-tuned the control of underwater levels in a 3D space, but it still doesn't help the fact that these levels aren't fun. And at the end of the day, if the gameplay and level design isn't fun, then what's the point of it being there in the first place? Yeah, underwater levels have terrible level design. Yeah, I'm just gonna say it, I'm not really a big fan of underwater level design in both 3D and 2D. Most underwater levels rely on your reflexes in terms of progressing into the level. They focus on adding tons of obstacles over the place and seeing how quickly you can either avoid them or how slowly you can sneak past them. There's not really a strategy to when it comes to properly beating an underwater level. What I mean by this is that most regular levels in video game rely on trial and error and practice to progress and get good at a game's mechanics. With underwater levels, it's pretty basic stuff. I would imagine for many game developers, underwater levels are probably the most difficult levels for them to make, just because of how hard it is to come up with good ideas that are both fun and challenging. Underwater in the real world is kind of generic. There's not much interesting stuff you could do to spice it up in a game. This is probably the reason why most underwater levels rely on adding interesting enemies to spice up level design. Underwater levels are generally filled with tons of fish-related enemies to face, but that also adds to a bit of a problem, and it's the fact that there's not really much you can do with a fish enemy. There's not really much you can do to make a fish interesting. Most of the time it's just big fish, small fish, fish that can shoot projectile, spiky fish, which is just a regular big fish. But hey, I'll commend the game developers for giving these enemies all unique designs. I mean, that it makes things at least a little bit interesting. When we look at other aspects to underwater levels, there's the fact that most of them are generally in caves and that most of them are pretty empty. Now I'll give them credit, with 2D games they at least add enough interesting elements to make the gameplay at least tolerable, but with 3D, that's where all things again go downhill. 3D underwater levels are probably going to be the most realistic experience of underwater in a video game, and if you've ever experienced underwater in real life, you'll realize it's nothing. Water in real life is just filled with empty nothingness. Now you can fill it up with tons of enemies, which is what many 3D platforming games do with their underwater levels, but that's really about it. Most underwater level missions are also kind of the same amongst games. See how long you can last underwater while collecting the thing. See if you can find these many objects without going up and getting water. Complete the underwater race. It's all boring. This is probably the reason why a lot of underwater levels aren't even proper underwater levels in 3D games. What I mean by this is that some of these quote-unquote underwater levels still contain land areas to explore on foot. So they can't even properly contain enough missions to fulfill the necessary standards of a quote-unquote fully underwater level. And also, as I mentioned before, most underwater levels are just empty, so the quote-unquote level design isn't even real level design. It's just big open space that takes a really long time to go through because of the slow controls, and that just, well, is boring. No matter how many enemies you fill the level with, or how many hazards the level has, or how many on-foot levels you have, it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, the base underwater level design is plain and boring. Not fun, not even tolerable, just boring. Now here's something I really didn't want to mention about underwater levels, and that's aesthetic. Now the reason you may be asking is why is because I think underwater in real life is beautiful. The beautiful neon lights when it's dark, the colorful coral rocks under the ground, the different algae growing underneath, it creates this beautiful atmosphere. One game that actually captures this really well is the swimming simulator game known as Abzu. I mean, the environment in that game and the music, it's all beautiful. But here's the thing, outside of this game and maybe a few others, why are so many underwater levels just rock and blue? Why? Why of all the things did you have to mess up the aesthetic? The aesthetic of underwater levels should have been the one thing they should have done right. And for some games, that is true. Like the Donkey Kong Country series. Those underwater levels are gorgeous to look at. But everything else, like I said again, it's all just rock and blue. These are some 2D games that add a bit of color into it, but bleh. And with 3D games, I mean, oh my gosh. You make the level design super realistic. You try to make it bare bones, barren underwater. You make the controls super slow. You do all of that and you make the backgrounds hideous. I mean, you could have at least made the backgrounds look detailed, therefore making these slow experiences tolerable to look at, but you couldn't do that. And it's so hard to see time and time and time and time again. All the underwater levels, doing the bare minimum when it comes to visuals. Oh look, blue background with vaguely ocean-like background objects, and oh look at this, a green rock platform, but sometimes it could be purple. Wow, big difference. And it's not just that, it's not just the aesthetic, it's also the gameplay changes and the level design. It's all these things culminating together that make underwater levels so hard to play through. Not just to play through, to look at, to witness, to experience. The idea of underwater levels was innovative, and they could have done so many great things with these levels, but they did the bare minimum. They didn't even really try with these levels, and that's my biggest frustration. These levels could have been just as good as any other level theme in any video game, but instead they're just the odd one out. They're just the poor levels, and they really, really suck. Well, that's why underwater levels suck. And I gotta be honest, I really thought that was gonna help me. I thought by talking about underwater levels, I'd finally be able to accept them and move on, but I still feel upset. I don't know what to do. Wait. The only way I'm gonna conquer my fear of water is if I step up and beat it. So I know exactly what I need to do. I'm gonna go and find water, real water, and beat it in a fight. Ladies and gentlemen, pack your bags because we are gonna fight water. Look guys, there it is! The pool! Rebels, attack! Because I hate you, water. That's why. You have such bad levels in video games. I mean, maybe. I guess that might be true. I've been really harsh on underwater levels today, and I can't really blame myself. There's just so many things to hate about these levels, from the poor choices of aesthetic and gameplay changes and level design. Who wouldn't want to hate these levels? But I'm missing out on some of the good aspects, because there are truly good aspects. One crucial point I neglected to talk about for the entirety of this video was the music, because even if the underwater levels is so bare bones to experience, it's still topped together with the incredible music that each of these levels present. Seriously, sometimes I think game developers know that they're making dumb levels with underwater levels, but they still continue to make them anyway because that's their excuse to adding good music in a video game. And yeah, the music of underwater levels are truly great. Some of the best pieces of music, not just in gaming, but in the entire world of music. These pieces are just so fantastic. It's a shame they have to be put in such terrible levels. Another thing I neglected to talk about were video games with really good underwater levels, such as the modern Rayman series and Donkey Kong Country Returns series. These levels, compared to other underwater levels, actually have good gameplay. The controls are fun and fluid and just so fun to go through. It's fast paced, the aesthetic of the levels are just gorgeous, like look at this artwork, and the level design is top notch, introducing these curves and platforms to actually grab on and just making underwater traversal incredibly fun. And I gotta admit, some of the underwater levels I've mentioned previously weren't even that bad. Like, I know I mentioned how the Mario 64 underwater levels suck, and to be fair, they are incredibly horrible levels, but the experience from them is quite memorable. Like, I remember the experience seeing the giant eel for the first time, or swimming through the underwater ship, and all these under secrets found in these levels. Like, they were terrible to play through for sure, but the experience was something pleasant. So yeah, I guess not every underwater level sucks after all. So, underwater levels. I gotta admit, I'm not really a fan. I mean, I do think there are good qualities to them, and it was wrong for me to say they suck. There is good value out of them, but overall, I'm not really a fan. But I shouldn't have said my anger for underwater levels being my anger for real life water. I'm sorry I did that to you. Well, that was underwater levels, and love them or hate them, it doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, it's just video games. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to be playing some Super Mario Galaxy on my totally legit Wii controller. Ha 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 ha. Wait a minute. This isn't a Wii controller at all! And enjoy spending my time with a red thing, a dead console, and a scary man on a PS3 controller.